Hello, welcome to InSight. I'm Wendy Brokaw. Singular Visions is the name of a unique exhibition at Hallie Ford Museum of Art here in Salem, shining a spotlight on self-taught artists whose work is now part of the museum's permanent collection. Their exhibit features over 50 works from what is considered to be Oregon's most extensive museum collection of self-taught artists. It also highlights recent acquisitions created by contemporary artists working with Living Studio, a studio program for neurodivergent artists. Here to talk about this exhibition and artists featured in it is collection curator Jonathan Bucci and Bruce Burris, director of Living Studios. I'm so glad to have you as my guest today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy.
Jonathan, this is a singular visions exhibition.
Yeah.
Why the word singular?
Yeah, it's kind of a play on words a little bit, singular and then a plural on visions. So, but what I was hoping to capture with the title was the idea that each of these artists have their own independent, singular approach to what it is that they're making. And that they each have unique visions as well. And so it's exhibition, there's not a theme that ties the whole exhibition together in terms of, aside from the fact that all the artists are self-taught. And so each of the artists has their own individual approach and vision, and so it's an exhibition of singular visions, and so that's where the title comes from. Mm-hmm.
How did the idea for a collection of works by self-taught artists evolve? What was the incentive for it?
Sure. Well, it evolved kind of organically, I think, at first, and then more intentionally, as time moved on. But I tend to think about the kind of start of it as an exhibition that I organized in 2016 by an artist named Russell Childers, and Russell was a wood carver who had been institutionalized at Fairview here in Salem in the early to mid 20th century. And without getting into too much detail about Russell, the exhibition was really the first exhibition to look closely at Russell's work and his life. We did a book project related to it, and I got pretty invested in the project and interested in his his experience as an artist and his work and his life. And after that, I started looking at more self-taught artists' work. I started, being more kind of aware and interested in it. And around that same time, we also, and as a result of that exhibition to some degree, other collectors in the region who knew that we had done this exhibition started approaching us with offers of donations of work by self-taught artists. And so that we started like, this is an interesting area to sort of focus on within the museum's collection. We tend to be a regional art museum with a focus on the Northwest, but within that there are kind of areas of concentration, and this was something that I was particularly interested in focusing on as a curator, and was supported by the leadership of the museum, and so we kind of continued to kind of build it. And over time, and then the idea of an exhibition started coming together, and I, and naturally I had known Bruce and what Bruce did, and we'll talk about what Bruce does, and that kind of naturally kind of tied into the exhibition. So,
thank you. And there are two parts to this exhibition, one involving Living Studios. Bruce, tell us about Living Studios. You're its director, and it started in Corvallis, and now here it is in Salem.
Yeah. Well, we started right at the very beginning of COVID, and so we've been going about 4 years now, and we're working with about roughly 40 artists, and many who come to the studio, right? So you'll see that people are coming there and working and interacting, socializing, getting support material-wise and so forth. And then others who are perhaps working at home or more independently will also support any artist really who has an interest in wanting to be supported. That's really the name of the game for us.
And these are neurodivergent artists. Can you describe
this
what that means?
This is a current kind of a catch-all. It's not the best of, and it's always wrapped in controversy. But right now, in a general way, this is what we're using as a way to suggest that people are working differently, somewhat. It is the kind of supports that we collaborate with in terms of working with neurodivergent artists that make our studio process really interesting and lively and electric, very exciting.
How do you support them? How do you support these artists?
Well, we hire artists to work with the artists in the program.
Oh.
And we don't teach as much as collaborate with, or maybe even coach is another way of looking at it, perhaps. But what we're really looking at is what it is that people are invested in on their own. And what we do is encourage more of it or support aspects of it. Or perhaps someone will say, you know, I need to make paper, man. All right, so we'll figure that one out. We'll figure out a way for that person to make the paper that they require. Or with another, it might be kind of an historical thing in which I need to research this, etc. So we will do that kind of work, which will enable people to make the best work that they can.
And
You
I'll
brought
just
some with-
add to that, because another huge thing that Bruce does is he gets the work seen. And so he makes sure that his artists and they help make connections in the community for artists. And that's critically important, because that's how people like me get brought into the project.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And
Good point.
And at the actual exhibit, these artists were there to meet and greet people, right?
Oh, heck yes. They sure were. And that's exhilarating and important. You know, it's pretty easy to say, and I think I can say this without getting myself into trouble, that most of the artists in our program have really not ever had an esteemed community voice. You know, people haven't paid attention to what artists in our program are saying and doing and so forth. And so when that occurs, that is that moment when the artist feels fulfilled, outside of making the work itself. It's like being a part of the community in this way, and in an esteemed way, because artists here are seen as like the top of the food chain, and that is really different. So we love that, and it's also fantastic for family who've been supporting these artists all their lives, and staff in the various residential and institutional environments that are also supporting people. It doesn't often happen that people are applauded for their amazing skills. and we, as Jonathan said, we help place the ambition and the work and the sorts of outcomes in an environment in which outside people can appreciate and admire and see this work. It's really amazing.
And Jonathan, is that changing the dynamic between the idea that there are those people who are artists, and then there are the actual official artists who have gone to school?
Right, sure. And I think it is. I think, and that's the hope. And I think that's one of the reasons that we wanted to present this exhibition and this work here at the Hallie Ford Museum of Art. And it's I do think that. Yeah.
Bruce?
I agree. I don't know what more that I could really say to that.
Yeah.
Well, it's because people often think perhaps traditional art is always going to be looked at differently.
Sure.
But when you're looking at the work that you're presenting here, or from self-taught artists, I find it interesting that some schooled artists are actually applying some of the techniques or getting inspiration from this sort of work.
Yeah, and that's definitely the case that I see. I certainly can see it in contemporary artists who take are taking influence and paying attention to artists who are self-taught in their own work, or folk artists in their own work. And so I think that barrier that existed between these two worlds is beginning to dissolve to a certain degree as museums and organizations like Bruce's, like Living Studios, get more attention. I think that the artists that who are self-taught and maybe neurologically divergent are getting recognized.
I like one thing about this exhibit that is unique and new to me, and that is you have a virtual exhibit of this entire thing. And I was playing with it yesterday, following the circles in it, and they take you into different rooms, and then you can look at different works of art. It's fascinating that you can do that. Yeah. And you've brought some work here today.
Right. You said that you really enjoyed the work of Greg Persons, who is a photographer, and maybe Jonathan, maybe you could just say a word about him. And I brought something. So he's a photographer, but he really indulges in a lot of different media. But can you?
I can talk a little bit about Greg. Greg's work is interesting. You know, one of the things that we talked about a lot as we were organizing this exhibition, and I had a couple of curatorial assistants who I talked to this about, was about kind of how biography plays a role in the interpretation and in sort of the critical discussion of this sort of work, where finding the balance between an individual person's kind of personal experience and story versus the work that it is that they're making, and where is the balance in that within when you're analyzing and looking at the work and assessing the work. And for the most part, we try to keep the biography to a minimum, because, and oftentimes these artists, you know, these self-taught artists who are neurodiverse may have different stories than other people have had, and that is a little bit interesting. But we don't want that to necessarily be the takeaway. We want people to look at the art and appreciate the art for what it is made. There are some artists, and Russell Childers, I think, falls into this category. James Castle falls into this category, and I think Greg does as well, where their personal story is in a way kind of tied closely to the art that they make and the content in the work. And so Greg's work, I also think of Greg's work as a little more conceptual to a certain degree than maybe some of the other artists' work. Greg is in a wheelchair and has difficulty communicating, I guess would be a way to describe him. But he was injured in an accident in an intersection where he was hit by a car that led to the profound sort of disabilities that he has, as I understand this. And a lot of the imagery that he uses, and I think that's probably the imagery in the paintings that Bruce is showing up front here, and the stop signs and stop lights, things like that. These are all, the photography that he often does is of streets and of intersections. And so he is making work about himself and about his identity and about his personal experience when he makes these paintings and takes the photographs that he takes of intersections. And so it is, I think, visually interesting work. I love the mark making, I love his use of color and all that, but at the same time the content and the imagery that he's using is tied very closely to personal experiences that he has, that is very much about who he is as an individual.
This is not a photograph.
No, this is a painting, but he does photographs too. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can tell us about this particular painting here, can you?
It's a part of a series. And is that one of the paintings there? I can't
This
remember.
is a stoplight painting.
Yeah, no, so this is a stoplight painting.
Yeah.
And then this is a stop sign at an intersection. So here's an intersection with the traffic lights. Here's an intersection with a stop sign.
Yeah.
And you know, they're abstracted and beautiful and extravagant, and they tell a part of a really important story. Another very cool thing I thought about Greg's work and the museum, and Jonathan in particular, that as a photographer, Greg is just like some of us are using materials that don't translate very well when you go to like commercial scale. And some of the images that Greg had were like tiny pieces, and they were not even good for printing out. But we never did get around to these pieces this time. But they were taken seriously. We're trying to figure out like how can we use these and how can we present them, and really spending a lot of time trying to sort out what it was that people had done and how can we, show this to the rest of the world in a way that they'll understand. And so it didn't click on those very small images this time around, but maybe next time. But we started the dialogue around all that, and so that's, to me, that's quite exciting.
Yeah.
And these images here, they
Well, I brought that book because now these are collages mostly by we call him a collage monster, and his name is Alex. And a lot of these collages are his, but the book itself, and this is what happens in our studio environment so often, Alex was, I think, inspired by the books, the handmade books that Greg was putting together for his work. And I
We
think
have
you
one.
yeah,
We have one in the show.
yeah, you have one of Greg's. And so I brought this in just to kind of show the kind of communication.
May I?
Oh, sure, yeah. The kind of communication and
could you hold this?
yeah, the kind of communication that people have. Those are some of Greg's photographs. Right, and so this is a dialogue which occurs amongst artists in the program, and in fact, currently we have a staff exhibit in our little gallery space, and one of the things that we really talk about on the narrative part of that is how we are ourselves influenced by the work that we are a part of every day, the people that we're a part of every day. How is our work influenced? And in my own work, it surely is. And anyway, on their own. Now, Alex isn't in this exhibit, but I really wanted to point out how this whole thing kind of works. But these are fantastic collages.
They are.
So,
Rather communicative.
yeah. So anyway, yeah, pretty good.
Can you give us an idea of one of the artists? Can just take us to some of the artists that are in the permanent collection, Jonathan?
Sure. Some
of the images.
Sure, yeah. There's, we have, one of the things that's, is in this exhibition are two drawings by an artist named James Castle. James is probably the most kind of well-known artist that's in the exhibition. He was from Idaho. He passed away in the 70s, I believe. But he actually had a very similar story to Russell Childers in a lot of ways. There's a lot of parallels between their life stories, their discovery by sort of the larger art world. But James couldn't hear and couldn't speak. He lived with his family outside of Boise, and he made these really kind of they're a little bit haunting, a little bit desolate, and sometimes sort of invented drawings, small drawings on found pieces of paper of his life, of the spaces where he lived, the farm and the property, kind of where they lived out there. They were all made from really simple materials, like I was saying, found paper and soot from the family fireplace, where he would take that and mix it with saliva, and just using little toothpicks and ways to kind of move the soot around, he'd created these really beautifully kind of open-ended narrative drawings. And the two that we have in the exhibition right now One of them is sort of this fragment of a staircase, and the other is the interior of what looks like maybe a country store or something. First time that I've worked at the museum for close to 20 years. It's the first time we've had them on view, so that is great to get things out that we haven't shown before. But they also are being hung in the same gallery, and and right next to actually an artist named Matt Conklin, who has worked with Bruce in the past. And so it also gives us an opportunity to put contemporary artists from the region here in context, and juxtapose them against really renowned artists who are also from the region. But it's just really nice to be able to kind of break down a barrier that exists for someone like James Castle. Everyone is sort of lauded and widely regarded, and then be able to put more emerging artists kind of next to them and let them have a little conversation back and forth.
Tell us about one of the other people in the exhibit from Living Studios.
Well, you mentioned Matt Conklin, and his work is the iconic work that you're going to see on a number of brochures and so forth touting this exhibit. And again, like a lot of the artists in our program, he really uses a lot of media. He does zines, drawings, comics, etc. But what he's particularly well known for are these enormous cardboard skyscraper, Gaudi-like environments, buildings, and they're incredible. And they have an amazing narrative that goes along with them. So a recent one, for example, was a building that was intended to house Russian diplomats. So there's a helicopter pad up top, but as you work your way down, the housing spaces go from very rich to service workers, and he's very aware of that and very conscious of that. And he reads a lot of architecture, so he's really in terms of him knowing his architecture, he's amazing, and he visits sites and he looks at buildings. But another amazing thing about him on YouTube, he has a site. It's something to do with these train layouts that he makes. And in his mom's basement, and how I met him was that I saw things that he had made for this enormous train layout, all different scales, all sorts of buildings made out of bowling balls and bowling pins and cups and bottles and you name it, and it takes up his mom's basement. And it's very exciting work. And each individual piece, and it bridges with superheroes on them. And I mean, it goes on and on. But he really he has a backstory for everything, and these are really sophisticated things, that he pieces together. And also the trains run. He creates a different holiday trains and so forth, and he videotapes them, and he puts these on, I think it's called Train Guy,
like
or
that.
Train Guy 100 maybe, and he has a few hundred videos. So everything that he does is kind of scaled up in that way. But I saw individual pieces. I didn't understand initially that they were from his mom's, the setup that his mom had in their basement. I thought they were individual sculptures and so forth that he had made, because they work that way too. And so that's how I was introduced to his work, and gradually I tracked him down, and now he's in our program.
I can't imagine the scale of all of this.
Well, the layout and because he uses from these enormous plastic trains that run on batteries on one level to little
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so all different. He's not like one of these train guys, right? They're doing all scaled things and so forth, and with the perfect scenery. Well, it's not never perfect. They have a good time blowing all kinds of stuff on there, but it's just a wild fantasy. Really beautiful.
Oh, it makes me wonder. This must be just joyous news for all of your artists to be showcased like this, and probably startling. They don't know what's going to happen next, but it can't help but change them in some way, inspire them perhaps.
That is very true, and we really have to. Well, I don't know, do we have to? But we've taken people. We have talked and talked and talked about what this exhibit means. And we've shown work in other exhibits, other galleries around town. And this is a constant thing that we do, so that when people have their moment, they understand where they are in the world. But I think you're right. I mean, for a lot of the week, people are devalued, right? And then all of a sudden, it's like top of the heap. And it's hard to comprehend, I think, for some. But everyone seems to enjoy it. And again, one of the really gratifying things is to see relatives and friends in particular, and also people who work in residential and in other parts of their lives, see what they've accomplished and the level and scale of it. And that is so wonderful to see, because people work very hard in this field and they do amazing work working with others. And so it's super good to see this kind of thing, right? Oh, and that's what happened when we visited the museum. The fact that it's in a museum, too, to see their work in a museum. We have 10 plus artists who are in the exhibit at the museum. I think that's about
right around there, yeah.
And those 10 or so artists, the museum purchased about close to 30 pieces from those artists, because some multiples, right? And so it was just a really significant experience. Yeah.
Jonathan, where do you see this self-taught artists collection going in the future?
Well, I think we'll continue to collect, and both historic artists and contemporary artists who were self-taught. I think we'll use this work the way we use any work in our collection. So integrating it into, our permanent collection galleries, which we already do to a certain degree. There's a Russell Childers piece on view in the permanent collection gallery right now. But certainly Living Studios artists will get rotated into, our Carl Hall Gallery for Northwest Art. And, thematic exhibitions that we curate from our permanent collection. So the work, now that it's entered into the museum's collection, can be used for a whole range of different, reasons to sort of tell a whole range of different stories, depending on whatever exhibition it gets put into. And then we'll continue to collect, and we'll continue to grow the collection. I think that it's been well received, and I think it's really interesting work myself. And so as long as I'm here, I'll be doing that.
Well, thank you for being my guest today on InSight. This has been illuminating and quite enjoyable. I've learned a lot today. Art communicates, and both of you did about this artwork. Thank you. And thank you for joining us today on InSight. I'm Wendy Brokaw. Hallie Ford Museum of Art in Salem is the only liberal arts college art museum in the Northwest. Learn more about this exhibit and more at willamette.edu/arts. Living Studios of the Willamette Valley is a program under Cornerstone Associates with programs in Corvallis and Salem. Learn more at cornerstoneassociates.org/living studios.